My name is Megan Peters, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers this evening. I am a cognitive and a computational neuroscientist here at University College London. I also have a strong philosophical streak, so this is a really exciting time for me. I work on metacognition, subjective experience, and consciousness, so this is very much my home territory, and it's going to be difficult for me to not jump into the conversation. But before we fully launch in, I want to say a few words on why we are all here tonight. So, self-awareness, this is one of the oldest subjects of human inquiry. It's the mind's capacity to take itself as an object, to monitor and question its own thinking. The contemplative and philosophical traditions have, of course, examined self-awareness for thousands of years. But what has changed more recently is that metacognition, or self-referential cognition, has also become an experimental, empirical science. Over the past couple decades, we've developed ways to measure it, to operationalize it, to study its mechanisms and its source and its function in the brain. And that puts us in an unusual and, I think, very valuable position. We can now bring that empirical work into direct conversation with traditions that have been thinking about the self for far longer than the past few decades. So tonight, we hope will be one of those conversations, in a meeting of different perspectives rather than a contest between them. So our aim tonight is to begin to see what each can offer the other. So now I'll introduce our two speakers for the evening. Acharya Prashant is a philosopher and the author of acclaimed bestsellers, including Truth Without Apology and Karma. With an online following of more than 100 million people, he is one of the most followed philosophical voices in the world. And in 2026, he was named to the Watkins list of the most influential living thinkers. His work centers on what he calls the mass-based education of the self. This is delivered to millions of students worldwide through a teaching app and a structured curriculum. His UK tour this summer has taken him to Oxford, Cambridge, and the UK Parliament, where he has spoken on clarity, freedom, and climate change in dialogue with thinkers including Professor Jonathan Birch, Professors Lars Chitka at Queen Mary, the psychologist Dr. Melanie Joy, the biologist Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, and the non-dual philosopher Rupert Spira. That journey has now brought him here to UCL. And tonight, Acharya Prashant is here to talk with Professor Steve Fleming. Dr. Fleming is professor of cognitive neuroscience at UCL's Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience and a group leader at the Max Planck UCL Center for Computational Psychiatry. He studied psychology and physiology at Oxford, completed his PhD here at UCL, and did his postdoctoral work at NYU in New York. His research combines psychophysics, brain imaging, and computational models to understand the mechanisms behind subjective experience and metacognition. This is work recognized by the British Academy Wiley Prize, a Philip Leverhulme Prize, the BPS Spearman Medal, and most recently, the 2025 Royal Society Francis Crick Medal and Lecture. Steve also writes for a general audience. You should check out his 2021 book, Know Thyself, which has now been translated into 7 languages. So please join me in welcoming them both. Steve, Acharya Prashant, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Megan, for a wonderful introduction. And lovely to meet you.
Same here. Glad.
Where shall we start?
You tell me.
Perhaps we could start with how we think about and define self-knowledge, metacognition, how we approach these very broad topics. I could maybe say a few words about how we think about it in neuroscience.
Yes.
And as Megan mentioned in her introduction, for us in the lab, what we've been interested in is the human capacity to not only think about and navigate the external world, but also to think about ourselves. So the idea that the mind is not only trying to figure out what is out there, but humans also have this capacity to put ourselves in that mental model of the world And that enables us to know things about our personalities, our behaviors, our skills, our capacities. And we've been trying to probe this in experiments that we can run in the lab to understand how aspects of the human brain might support this broad capacity to think about oneself. I think one area that I'm very interested in discussing with you is that doesn't necessarily mean that the knowledge you gain is accurate or useful, or it's something we all do, but perhaps some of us have more self-awareness, more self-knowledge than others. But it is something we're hoping that we can start to study in the lab and find out things about how it is grounded in the biology of how the brain works.
Actually, the work that neuroscience, the entire field, has been doing, and especially your contribution in that, has been very useful in the direction of self-knowledge, specifically in the field of education, the importance of self-knowledge. The relationship between metacognition and self-knowledge or self-awareness, I'll want to put it across with an example. So there is a car, there is the engine, and what the engine is producing is speed. So we could think of the engine and the vehicular speed as one thing, which you would call as the first order variable. Then there is the speedometer on the dashboard, and that is another piece of hardware. In the same vehicle, one piece of hardware is the engine producing the speed. Another piece of hardware is the speedometer measuring the speed, detecting the speed, which is one part of the hardware reading another part of the hardware or the system, and it says 90 kmph or 90 mph. Here we have miles. So 90 miles per hour. Now this 90 mph can be pretty much independent of the actual speed being produced by the engine, right? So this is the second order reading, which we can denote in the field of neuroscience by the word confidence. Confidence. Then there is the radar gun outside, which is telling us what you'll refer to as the ground truth. What the actual speed of the vehicle is with respect to the ground, with respect to the ground, relative to the ground. And then you look at the speedometer and you look at the radar gun, and if there is a constant difference, we would call it as metacognitive bias. If these two move more or less parallelly, we would call it as metacognitive accuracy. If they move together in one direction, when the speed increases, as shown by the radar gun, the speedometer also starts showing an increased speed. We would say, okay, this is sensitivity, metacognitive sensitivity. And this is beautiful. This shows that the system is capable of reading itself. And the system really doesn't have a choice. What is happening is that one part of the system is simply reading the other part of the system, generating a report. A report is a reading, not a choice. Now, none of this is really referring to the driver, the driver of the vehicle. So that's where self-knowledge comes in, because the driver has a choice, the driver has an intent, unlike the entire piece of hardware and the testing apparatus, the radar gun, each of which is deterministic. They don't have a choice there. If there is a fault with the speedometer, there is a fault. It's got to do with the structure of the brain. Some people simply have better brains, so they'll have better metacognitive accuracy. They don't really have a choice there. What self-knowledge deals with is the one holding the choice, the driver. So system reading the system would be metacognition, and the driver investigating himself and ultimately discovering that there is no driver. But that comes later.
Okay.
That comes
maybe,
later.
Maybe I can respond to say, no, I think it's a beautiful example. It's one that I should use in my lectures, because that was an excellent description of metacognitive bias and sensitivity through the analogy of the vehicle. And I think I think your example also leads to a lot of interesting questions that are live questions in the neuroscience field at the moment, which is that when we started this set of investigations, really the empirical science of metacognition got going in the 1960s and 70s with psychologists who were interested in child development in educational settings. So children building beliefs about what they know and don't know, and using that to guide their own learning. And then more recently, we've had the arrival of psychophysical methods to more precisely quantify metacognitive biases and how sensitive someone is to their own performance. So often this is in the context of tasks involving judgments about the outside world. So whether a stimulus is A or B, whether it's tilted one way or the other. So something perceptual usually. And the interesting thing about those contexts is that as the experimenter, we know what they should say. We designed the stimulus, so we own the ground truth. We have access to what they should answer. Okay. And then what we sometimes find is that people's confidence estimates can diverge from their performance. Yes. So sometimes they might be wrong in their initial judgment about the world, and we know they're wrong because we as the experimenters have designed the stimulus, and yet they're very confident about being correct. So that would be a failure of metacognitive sensitivity. And you often see those kind of patterns of behavior when people have differences or damage to areas, particularly the prefrontal cortex, yes. Exactly, yeah. Which seems to be playing a role in building this internal model we have of ourselves as we behave. But so that's all fine. That's all interesting. That's all well, in a sense, it's a nice paradigm to study. But it gets more difficult when you don't know the ground truth. Because now, as you say, there is no external perspective on what you should be monitoring as quotes right or wrong. And we've been looking at this in some other experiments where we've looked at not these more perceptual judgments, but judgments of what people would like to eat, or what lotteries they prefer in an economic choice scenario. And for those choices, there is no right answer. It's completely up to you. I can't tell you whether you should prefer to eat this food or this food. And yet people seem to have different degrees of confidence in those choices that track now not the ground truth, because there is no ground truth that we can verify, but instead it tracks something about how consistent they are over time. So it's almost as if it's tracking if they realize they've made an error, if you like, in a choice about what to eat, what they're really telling us is, if you gave me that choice again in the future, I would choose differently. So there's something about knowing how you would behave in the future that seems to be important for metacognition. And the one area of your analogy where I would perhaps be divergent on is the notion of the driver, because there I think what it nicely picks out is in the neuroscience, the difference between what we call implicit metacognition, so this speedometer that's constantly monitoring the speed of the car, and more explicit metacognition, which is the conscious knowledge we have of how we're doing. And we would say those are all part of the same hardware. They're all part of the same physical brain. They're just different levels of the system. They're different models that people are building at different levels of the hierarchy, but they're still part of the same hardware, and they can still be distorted or impaired in various ways.
So this is very interesting. In fact, it gives me more material to take to my students. So you see, I'll take this thing up in two parts. One, the matter of confidence existing with almost zero relation to ground truth, right? Where an objective ground truth is either not present or is indeterminate, and yet confidence exists. So that's the first thing. Second, whether a driver exists at all. What is this thing that philosophy, especially the Indic streams, call as the self? Because I'm calling the car as the system and driver as the self. So is this distinction even real? So these are the two things. So now another analogy. I'm not sure whether it would be equally befitting, but let's try. So think of somebody running on a treadmill. So relative to the ground, the speed is 0, relative to the ground. But this fellow's internal confidence would locate him at 10 kmph, 20 kmph, something, some number. And that brings me to the fallacy of what we call as introspection. Because the example over here is physical, it needs to be taken to the mental dimension. So we introspect and we think that we know what is happening. Just as in the treadmill example, the runner, his entire physical apparatus feels that distance is being covered. But with respect to the ground, there is actually no distance being covered. Now, when it comes to knowing yourself, we all say, I'm reading my mind, I'm changing my mind, as if we really know ourselves. This gives us two layers of possible errors or divergences. One, the system isn't reading itself rightly, right? The system is not, the accuracy itself is very poor. The second, the one who claims to own the system has a stake in ignoring the reading, or worse still, misreading it, right? Because there is always somebody to whom the system is. That brings us to the question of whether the ego is a product of the system, a part of the system, a neural thing, or something apart from it. It's a beautiful question. And philosophy has been grappling with it since just so long.
For sure.
You see, on the one hand, ego cannot exist without this system. So you're very right on that, right? No brain, no ego. No, I'll expand that. No body, no ego, right? Brain is simply a part of the body. No body, no ego. Nobody to claim I am the body or mine is the body. Nobody to make that claim. But then at the same time, the ego cannot be a product of the system, because the ego does not say I'm located at this place in the system, or that I'm connected to this part of the system. Ego is the claim, the system is mine. Now that's not a claim that the system is making. The claimant might be a fraudster. We can examine the claimant and come to the conclusion that the driver actually does not exist. Right? It's a self-driven car. We may come to that. But there is a feeling nevertheless. I own this body. I own this body. These are my thoughts. So there is this thing that tells stories. And why does Indian philosophy want to study that thing as separated from the system? The answer is very clear. The answer is experiential, ontological. The answer is that the brain does not suffer. There is nociception, there is pain, there is suffering. Systems can experience nociception. Body can experience pain. But there is somebody else who is suffering all the time, who wakes up at 3 a.m. and says, I am lonely. There is somebody who is saying, I do not know what I want, but for sure there is something that I want terribly. I am frustrated, but I do not know the cause. Oh, I am so lonely. Oh, memories of the past haunt me. Oh, what am I to do in the future? What do I make of myself? Where did I come from? What is the purpose of life? This is the one that suffers. And this is the one that cannot be located anywhere in the body. So that's the reason this one must be studied separately. And the study of this one, the suffering one, is called the field of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge as different from knowledge of the system. Not as different from knowledge of the brain, knowledge of the neurons, knowledge of particular parts of the brain. So that's a beautiful and a very, very important field to study, because that tells us so many things that are deterministic but are claimed by the ego as choices. So that's the very importance of the whole field of neuroscience and so many other things that science tells us. We come to know where the ego does not have a choice, because those things are deterministic. We come to know that certain thoughts that are arising, they are arising probably because there was something that you ate. So it's not a choice you made. It was something that you just swallowed. But you are saying, okay, I am thinking this way. So it helps us negate the driver when we come to see what is it that the system is doing by itself, including making errors. The system is capable of making great errors. And that's what you have beautifully studied. But nevertheless, the system remains separate. The system can experience pain, but psychological suffering, there the sufferer is somebody else. We investigate that in the field of self-knowledge, and that sufferer says, no, I am not the body. I'm not the body. I'm the owner of the body. That sufferer, sir, sometimes it blows the body up. It says, I hold certain ideologies for which I must enter an enemy camp and detonate myself. It can even destroy the body. Now, the body is not going to do that to itself on its own. No system is built to be suicidal, right? We know this. We know injured cells destroy themselves. But then you could have a healthy young man, right, entering a crowded civilian space and blowing himself up. Now, this cannot be explained by the body itself. So there is somebody else, however false it is when ultimately tested. But this one is self-referential and self-certifying. It claims existence. Not only does it claim existence, it claims ownership over everything that the system does. It will say my thought. It will say I am the certifier. So that's what is studied differently.
I think it's very interesting, and I very much find the analogy of the self-driving car and the notion of how the driver may, in some sense, be illusory.
Yeah, delusional.
I think the one area I'm interested in pushing on is the extent to which the brain and the mind, as supported by the brain, is able to hold very compelling beliefs that may nevertheless be false. And those could be so compelling that they can drive people to actions that may diverge completely from what is good for them and the survival of the body, and, as you say, the general imperative that evolution is kind of built into us as biological agents. But those beliefs that the brain is capable of building can be so compelling that people lack insight into the facts they maybe are harmful. And we see this in clinical conditions such as psychosis, where people can have very vivid and compelling hallucinations that we can even study at the level of sensory representations in the brain, that people can believe so strongly they are hearing voices and the voices are not really there, and yet their auditory cortex is active in ways that compel them to believe that those voices are real. So I guess I think I agree largely with what your perspective on the self here, and it chimes with a philosophy that I've been fond of for many years, which is Daniel Dennett's notion of the user illusion, and the idea that we have a sense that there is somewhere that it all comes together, what Dennett called the Cartesian theatre, that we are somehow viewing what our brains are doing and processing this information. And through the years, going back to Descartes and ever since him, physiology have tried to find that place, and we haven't found it.
There is no place
where it all comes together. So I think we're very much agreed on that. I think where perhaps I would diverge, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that the belief that we have this narrative self is itself grounded in the way the brain is working. It is able to form these compelling beliefs, and that's what in consciousness research people are increasingly referring to as illusionism, the idea that the notion we have some kind of coherent conscious self is a Dennettian user illusion, but that doesn't mean it's floating free of how the brain is working. It means it's part of the model that the brain is supporting.
Please see, you could have two individuals with perfectly healthy brains, and no scientific scan will ever be able to reveal which of these hold toxic beliefs, unless the hardwiring itself has changed. In fact, whether or not the belief is toxic is again dependent on who is conducting the test.
Well, that seems to be the problem there. So I think today I agree that we can't scan the human brain and find out what people are believing. That's not possible. Right. But in principle, if you were able to map things in high enough fidelity and know what certain, you wouldn't be able to know for certain, but you would be able to raise your confidence that someone is perceiving or believing a certain aspect of content. Right. So, and these experiments have been done. Right. We can now use decoding and machine learning techniques to read out patterns of brain activity that correspond to people seeing things even when they're not really there, or hearing things even when they're not really there. So, but I think the word that's doing a lot of work for you there is toxic, and that does seem to depend on any belief. Okay.
Any story, any narrative.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I think maybe you could. Maybe you could.
You see, okay, let's make it even more refined. Okay. They don't have the belief yet. We sit here, right, as storytellers. And there's this person here, and this person here, and this person, each of them with perfectly healthy brains, right? It would be impossible for a scan to predict how many among them and which ones exactly are going to buy our stories. It will be very difficult, right? And even if it is determined, there would be a certain confidence level which is probabilistic. Just probabilistic. Yet it is going to happen that somebody there is going to make a choice, right? Irrespective of the brain. The brain is alike. There is nothing in the brain suggesting that this story is more acceptable. You cannot map the structure of the brain to what is going to happen to the story. Who is it there who is buying into the story? So that's the one, and I do not mean to posit an agency, because the moment I do that, that agency will be situated within the system and therefore would be a part of the system. I'm not referring to a part of the system. I'm simply referring to, now this would become more interesting, and you will catch this. I'm referring to a computational error in the system. The ego as an error in the system, which means it cannot exist. Error by definition is something that is imagined but is not there. 2 + 2 = 5. Now, this kind of a thing doesn't exist, but it can be believed in. And I enjoy saying, and I want you to test that, because 2 + 2 = 5 cannot is not balanced. So the ego puts itself on the left hand side and says, now it is balanced. I, which is ego, I amness, +2 + 2 = 5. Now the equation stands balanced. So there is somebody who is making a choice for the system. Obviously, the system is doing a lot of stuff for itself. The lungs are deciding that between the O2 molecule and the CO2 molecule, they will take in the O2 molecule and reject the CO2 molecule. Yes, the system is making a lot of choices for itself. But apart from the system, there is also this drunkard, this hallucination, this delusion within, that claims to be the maker of choice and the sufferer also. The sufferer also. The system experiences pain. The sufferer builds a story around the pain. So that's the one that philosophy wants to go into, not just as intellectual curiosity, but because the intent is to help the sufferer. The sufferer is there, and you think the Buddha looking at the old man, the dying man, the diseased man, and the Buddha is saying, why the hell is everybody suffering? And it's from there that philosophy begins, and some of what we are discussing right now actually comes from the tradition of the Buddha, the Madhyamik philosophy, the Shunyavad, Nagarjuna. So this one. And yes.
So I think it's interesting the way you describe choice and agency, and this really how we think about free will and our impression as psychological beings of how we go about our daily lives and to what extent are we in control. And I think, as you say, there are so many things that we believe we are in control over, or we think we have agency over, whereas actually a lot of it is being guided by the situation or the bodily response and so on. And I think that where, again, we may be we're occupying really interestingly overlapping territory, coming at it from obviously different perspectives, but really overlapping territory, is this notion that regardless of whether things are deterministic or probabilistic at the level of neurons and behavior, there is something about we construct these narratives about ourselves. And that's where a lot of the psychological distress comes from. We build stories about ourselves, and they are sometimes very negative or distressing as well. And I think what's interesting is that those narratives themselves seem to have a place in how the brain supports the mind. So I don't think we know how. I think narrative and storytelling and how that works in terms of how we respond to stories and how we produce stories, I think is a very untapped area of psychology and neuroscience. It's a fascinating area. But I think we do have some sense that however it works, it's still grounded in neurobiology. And one example of this comes from these beautiful experiments of patients with surgical disconnection of the corpus callosum. So the two hemispheres have been disconnected, and this was done to attempt to cure intractable epilepsy. So these were experiments that were done by the surgery was done by the clinicians, and then Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga and Joe Ledoux back in the 60s and 70s studied a series of these patients and showed that if you set up an experiment so that a stimulus is flashed to one of the two hemispheres that have now been disconnected, and the way you can do that is because the input from the eyes crosses over and goes into the two different hemispheres largely separately, or the input from the two halves of visual space. And what they showed was that if you flashed a stimulus that went into, and you arranged it so that that information from the stimulus went into the right hemisphere of the brain, the person would still be able to use that object for some reason. So they would be able to draw it, or they would be able to act upon it. But they would be unable to say what it was because the information hadn't got into the left hemisphere, which typically supports language. But what was fascinating about those experiments is not just that it showed that you could do things with disconnected hemispheres of the brain, but that the left hemisphere would often make up a story about why the right hemisphere had done what it's done. And these were two hemispheres in the head of the same person. So I think it shows that however that narrative is being built, it's still being grounded in how the brain is working.
How the brain is working, yeah. But also, please think of, because we are talking about the brain and the mind.
Yes.
Please think again of a very healthy brain with a great metacognitive accuracy as well. Accuracy and sensitivity both, and still being a very accurate narcissist. This fellow knows that not only can he guess, but his guesses more often than not land rightly. This fellow also knows that even when without any reasoning he has this gut feel or intuition, more often than not, it lands rightly. His brain knows itself. His brain knows itself. And yet he could be a narcissist. Because the difference between brain and mind is determined by who is sitting at the center of the mind, calling the mind its own. You see, to the ego, everything is an object. The brain is an object to the ego. All the abilities of the brain too are an object to the ego. The body calls this thing as my body. The ego calls this as my body. The ego will say, this is my book. That is my family. That is my nation. Now, this kind of a thing cannot come obviously from a simple biological system. There is somebody who is saying, that is my ideology, that is my political belief, that is my religion. The biological system has nothing to do with all that. It's an evolutionary product. So the mind has somebody at its center that determines what to do with even the output of the brain. You could have a person with very ordinary metacognitive accuracy, but still quite kind, quite helpful. He does not read the situations well. He is often misled. He makes a fool of himself in front of the room sometimes, but he is still kind. Because the one at the center of the mind has intention in a different direction, in the direction of self-dissolution, in the direction of kindness and all that. So brain and mind have a third variable in between called the ego. Brain is a self-sufficient system, a product of evolution, as we know. But when it comes to the mind, something else comes into the picture, the ego, which says, my brain, I will use it in this direction. My mind, for example, please think of memories. So much must have happened to me, to you, to everyone in the audience since the morning. We do not remember everything. While just so much would have streamed into the brain, into the consciousness, but only some part is remembered. Why is only some part remembered? Who is making that decision to keep something and delete something, and keep only that, preferably, which matches with the identity statement of the ego? So even as we speak, they are not registering everything. And it is a choice being exercised by someone. The brain is not exercising that choice. The brain is a neutral machine. Memory too is an object to the ego, and the ego is deciding what to keep in the memory and what to delete it. We keep certain instances in the memory even if they happened 20 years back. And there were things that happened just 2 hours back, and we don't keep them in the memory. And the memory is not making that decision on its own. Somebody else is making that decision, and somebody else is self-preservatory. So that decision is being made for the sake of egoic preservation. In fact, that decision, if we see, has nothing to do with the welfare of even the physical system. I might choose to remember something that might cause this physical system some harm. We do that. Each one of us do that. So many of our diseases, for example, are lifestyle diseases. So the ego is making a choice which is hurting even the body. We are overeating. Now this overeating is not being decided by the physical system in its own interest. The physical system would say only this much and only of that particular kind. But there is somebody who is deciding to eat even if it hurts the body. So that one has to be studied, and that one is at the center of the mind. The mind obviously cannot be dissociated from the brain, but at the same time, the brain and mind mapping must include this third one, because this third one can distort everything. It's a born distorter.
I think memory is a very good example of how we can try to think about control and whether there is an active choice in what we store, for instance. And I think I agree that the process of what we take in from our environments and what ends up being stored is not a conscious choice in the way that we normally think about it. Instead, there is some rationale to it. There is something else. But what that something else could be, I think, is something very high level in the system, in the way the brain and mind interact, that people who work in memory neuroscience refer to this idea of a schema. So you have kind of a general mental model of how the world is working and of who you are as a person and your behavioral tendencies and skills and abilities and your name and your history and so on. And that is that's something we can access. That probably also supports this notion of narrative about our lives. And yet, if you have certain patterns of brain damage, often to areas of the medial prefrontal cortex, you can disrupt those high-level mental models of ourselves. Yes. People can genuinely lose the knowledge of who they are. And so I think that shows that it is grounded in the brain in some way that we don't fully understand.
It is.
And I think it's, maybe I can ask you a question here. So what I often struggle with in a lot of our work in metacognition is trying, in a sense, to do what Megan described in the introduction, which is to try and devise a more computational account. So rather than having a few steps where information is processed from the senses and it's used to control our behavior in certain ways to allow us to navigate the environment, we want to understand the intervening processes inside our heads that enable that, and ultimately to try and do that in a way where positing any third thing, any intervening aspect, is no longer necessary, because we have a full story of how the system is operating, which would include the narrative, it would include the schema, it would include things that people call that people refer to as the self, even if the self as an object doesn't actually exist.
That research, that computation would be beautiful. And what helps is that this third entity is not even needed in that.
No.
Because the system is actually, factually, independent of that I thing, that I amness.
Yeah.
It is actually independent. What is, however, seen, experienced, and I'm coming from empirical evidence, right? Not theory. Seeing how I operate, how each one of us operates. This one comes later on to collect the credit. This one hardly has a role in how the system actually operates. But later on it comes to say, the system is mine and I did it. And I am there to collect, therefore, the paycheck or pay the bill, whatever. Whatever. So I'm the one owning it all. It doesn't truly own. The system is independent. Therefore, the system can be independently studied as well. We do not need to posit the ego. See, the ego is the one that collects the results of all your studies. It does not need to be a part of your studies. If it is a part of your studies, it will distort the studies.
Yeah.
But whatever you come up with, the ego will come and steal credit for it. That's the ego.
So yes, I mean, maybe that's where we'll end up. I would be optimistic that we could try and explain that last part too, but maybe that's too far down the chain.
You can explain that, and the ego will say, I am the explainer.
So I realized I didn't actually ask you the question that I was going to ask, but the question I wanted to ask you is, so maybe I'll take one step back. The work that we're doing on metacognition, we're hoping will have some practical benefit, because it will enable people working in education and who are trying to understand how to help people with neurological and psychiatric conditions to better understand what to do when metacognition is distorted, when it is awry, when the speedometer is not lining up with the car's speed. And we see that a lot in neurological,
actually.
in everywhere,
in
but
everybody.
particularly in certain neurological conditions. In dementia, people will believe their memory is still, not all the time, but often they will believe their memory is still fine when actually it is distorted in various ways, and that can lead to problems with compensating and seeking help for seeking treatment and so on. And I grapple with this notion that should we try and correct that as scientists, as clinicians, because there seems to be a value sometimes in not having accurate metacognition.
Okay.
And I do you understand where I'm going?
Yes.
Because in the case, say, of dementia,
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Okay.
I get it. I pass through it. I have to make that decision many a times. See, first of all, the work that you are doing would be of benefit to my field. I'll give you an example how. So many things, because I work towards mass education of the self. The self. And when I say self, I don't mean the system. I mean the ego, the I amness. So many things that this self claims as its own doing or its possessions are actually systemic, and you are proving that. So for example, there is a phase lag between the action and the consciousness of it, and that comes not as an egoic decision but as a structural constraint, as a systemic thing. Now this is great in demonstrating to people that your thoughts are not your thoughts. You just come later and say, okay, this is mine. It might be hormonal, it might be situational, it might be conditional, whatever. So don't be so identified with your thoughts. This is the way in which your work helps people like me. Now the next thing, are there situations in which it is better not to have metacognition? Anesthesia. It's great to have in surgery. It's very bad to be anesthetized in life. You get this?
Yes.
I don't want you to pass through unnecessary pain, so I would cut off your metacognition when I am performing a surgery on you. That pain would be useless. So only in that condition, a condition of that kind of specificity, that I would advise that fine, do not help them, do not treat them. This is a situation that asks for mercy rather than compassion. But then if people say we do not want to look at ourselves because that proves psychologically distressful, then I would not agree. If there is somebody on the surgeon's table, I would say fine, numb him down. Let him not experience anything about himself for that brief period, for that specific task. But then this can very easily become an egoic excuse for sleepwalking through life. That's something it should not be allowed to become.
Very interesting. I mean, I think we're now straying into the moral territory, which is when is it a good thing or not a good thing to engage?
Not just moral, in fact, very empirical. Please see, pain comes for a purpose, even biologically, also psychologically. Pain is a signal, we all know that. We know that pain arrives so that remedial action can be taken. That's the reason physical systems generate that signal. That's also the reason the psychological system generates that signal. If pain is subdued for a while, very consciously, deliberately for a reason, we can understand that, because it would serve no purpose. You keep the patient conscious on the surgeon's table and the surgery can't be performed. Also, it would be needless cruelty. But then there is a pain that comes when you look into the mirror. When the ego looks into the mirror and sees how ugly it is and what it truly has been doing, then too a pain arises. Now this pain is something that should remain. We should not suppress this pain. Otherwise there's going to be a great problem. So it's not just moral. It is functional. It's functional. If suppose in our body a certain condition arises and pain can no longer be experienced, the body would collapse sooner than later. Right? Same thing for the psychological self. It is very important that pain is experienced when pain must be experienced for the sake of betterment of the body or the psyche. So in that sense.
So building on that, another thing we grapple with a lot in trying to build out metacognition as a science, because it's quite early days really. As Megan said in her introduction, there's been thousands of years of philosophical inquiry into self-knowledge and aspects of what we've been talking about as thinking about ourselves. But we've only really been studying this in a laboratory or neuroscientific context very recently, really decades at most. And I think the field as a whole is still trying to grapple with these ideas of, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier of verification, of if there, in simple experiments, we can define a ground truth.
Right.
We know we can, and a lot of the day-to-day work in the field is building statistical models of people's metacognitive judgments about their own performance and ability, and seeing how those line up with their actual performance, which you can only quantify because you have a ground truth. And I think we recognize in the field that that's limiting. That's not, we want to be broader than that. We want to be able to think about when metacognition is working well or poorly beyond the boundaries of the psychophysicist's laboratory. And to do that, we need some way of, some framework for thinking about verification. And one framework that has, I think, proved promising, and I'd be very interested in your response to this, is the notion that some things are relative to our social group, that the way we develop metacognition as children is because our parents and teachers help us figure out when certain situations are one way rather than another. So a classic case would be a child who falls over and you can see them, they're just about to cry, but then the parent comes in and says, no, you're not hurt, you're fine. And then somehow that stops them from crying. There's like almost like they're using their parent as their external metacognition to realize that their internal state might not be quite as bad as they thought it was. And so in some sense then, if that's how we build it, if that's how we build this capacity to think about ourselves, then in some sense verification depends then on the social group, on the parents, on the teachers.
Outside, yeah.
You can't do it yourself.
It's so fascinating. We are climbing the same hill from two little different sides. It's lovely. You see, I'll start from a different point, and then you will see I'm coming to where you are standing. We say the ego is self-referential because only the ego can say that I exist. No test, no CAT scan, nothing can establish the establishment of the ego as a gland, as a tissue, or even as a molecule in the system. But the ego still says, I am. It is self-referential. And in metacognition, one part of the system is designed to look at the other part of the system. When it comes to self-observation, self-knowledge, right, as we use it in spirituality or in wisdom literature, in philosophy, when it comes to self-knowledge, only the ego can look at itself. The system is designed to look at itself, even if with imprecision, but the system is still designed to look at itself. The speedometer is designed to measure the speed, but the ego is not even designed to look at itself, right? Looking at itself is a difficult choice it has to make. That's what I call as honesty. Now, this is not accuracy. This is honesty. Accuracy is structural. I can build a very accurate system. But honesty is always a choice, a matter of intent. It cannot be structural. It cannot be the output of a certain architecture. So the ego, we say as teachers, must honestly look at itself. Great teaching. Doesn't work. Because the ego is not designed to honestly look at itself. The ego is designed to preserve itself, right? It says self-preservation is the first priority. And this is coming from observation. I cannot have a falsifiable proof for it. But then if you look at people and how the way they operate without exception throughout the world, this is what you observe. So the ego is not designed for honesty, right? It cannot report accurately on itself. But if you have a beautiful brain, it can probably report accurately on itself, more or less, more accurately than other brains. But the ego is rarely demonstrate honesty, though teachers keep inspiring, please be honest, please be honest. Why can't you look at yourself in an unbiased and neutral and objective way? But we are incapable of that. We are biased, we are prejudiced, we are identified. That's when that thing comes in that you just mentioned, an external objective vantage point. Now, one thing is, the system is biased, therefore it cannot be fully accurate. The system is not designed to be fully accurate, and the ego is not designed to be fully honest. System cannot be accurate, ego cannot be honest. What does that mean for the organism? It means suffering. It means suffering. System cannot be accurate, ego cannot be honest, and life is ego plus the system. So that is a lot of suffering. Now this is where you require an objective verifier to hold the mirror. Just like the radar gun in the example we started off with. Somebody is standing there and in a special condition of neutrality, in a position that only he can be, because you see, when it comes to the system or the ego, the mover and the seer are one. The one who is acting, the actor, and the one who is supposed to look at the action, they are one. So there is conflict of interest. But the one who is situated there can be a little more neutral. So we say you require great company. You were talking of parenting. Huh? So we require great company. That's where great friends come in. That's where the great books come in. And that's where the teacher as a mirror steps in. The teacher not as a preacher, but as a mirror. A mirror that you can look into so that you learn about yourself very accurately. Yes, so I fully agree with you. The external observer is always needed. While I must qualify this statement, the external observer cannot be a substitute to inner honesty. Because the external observer, after all, is external. He will provide certain inputs. And if you're not honest, then you will not take those inputs. You might smash the mirror itself. Or the mirror is reflecting such an ugly face. This mirror is biased. Let me throw away the mirror. So honesty is needed. Obviously, if you have a beautifully accurate brain, nothing like it. But you don't have a choice in that, right? Depends on so many conditions, parents, genes, so much. So if that is there, wonderful. Along with that, you need honesty. And on top of honesty, you need that external help. And even that external help is a choice. Because the mirror might be available and you might decide to turn away from it. But nevertheless, you cannot say, I will do it on my own. That is a lot of self-delusion, a lot of self-deception. And that's the reason I advise myself and people around me to not to be too confident of themselves. Skepticism is a great policy when it comes to the self. Always, I'll narrate it to you. It's in Hindi and they'll translate it. किसी पर भरोसा कर लो, खुद पर मत करना. That means you could be pardoned for trusting anybody, but never trust yourself. Anybody could be reliable, but when it comes to you, you are not reliable, which basically means keep testing. And that testing requires honesty and also an external verifier. That external verifier is the friend, the teacher, the guide, the mirror, the scripture, and great books and libraries and everything. You have to have the intent to use everything to come to the truth.
I completely agree with that. And I feel like we could go on for a long time, but I think we are moving into the Q&A phase. So Megan is going to, I think, come back and manage that for us.
Wonderful. Thank you. We were going to let you go for just a couple more minutes
Okay.
because it was so engaging. But this, I'm truly amazed at how much convergence I heard throughout the very different perspectives and the very different backgrounds. Like there were so many cases where I felt like initially as that part of the conversation started, you were on such different pages. And yet through the dialogue, it came to be that those were maybe not so different perspectives after all. We're using very different language to talk about some of the similar concepts. There definitely were some cases where divergence remains, but I really enjoyed the conversation. I felt like I learned a lot. So I hope that everyone feels similarly to the way that I feel. So now I think we can open the floor to questions. Wow. Okay. Right there in the back. And I'm going to try to keep track. Keep those hands up and we'll try to keep like this and we'll try to keep track. Yes.
I'm really interested by the correlation between the heart and the brain. And when the heart switched on, the ego, the my kind of disappears a little bit for me. And I just wondered if that's something that you or anyone else studies.
So it has very much been a recent focus, I would say, in cognitive neuroscience has been this influence that the body is having on quite high level sensory, cognitive, emotional processing that's happening in the brain. So the body and the brain are intimately linked, particularly via the afferents coming up from the heart, the lungs, the stomach. And there's been some lovely work from my colleague at the ICN, Sarah Garfinkel, has shown that when you present stimuli relative to the different phases of the heartbeat, you can see this push-pull relationship where when the heart-brain channel is active, you seem to lose some sensory contact with the outside world, and then that resumes when the heart-brain channel is quieter. So the experiments are very much, I think, backing up your intuition that there is this constant and intimate link between the brain and the body.
Hi, yes, thank you. Very interesting discussion. So as a neuroscientist, I'm obviously biased in my belief that the mind cannot be explained without the brain. And obviously there's a lot of evidence where lesions in the brain or also pharmacological experiments causally change kind of processes of the mind, and then reversibly as well, subjective experiences functionally altering activation in the brain. So I'm just wondering what kind of experiment philosophers could come up with in collaboration perhaps with neuroscientists that would kind of be able to separate those two. And related to that, it's maybe a separate question, but whether you think the question of consciousness in artificial agents where there's no physical system, how that would maybe help with that.
When you talk of experiments, you want something objective, and that has been the beauty of science. Once it is objective, then it is verifiable, falsifiable, repeatable, you know. The problem is when the experiment is about the subject as well, then how can you make it objective? Because the subject is the receiver of the outputs of all experiments. For example, I found it interesting, the language of the last questioner, when he said, the ego seems to disappear or subside for me. Even the disappearance of the ego is for someone. The ego subsides for me, and that is the ego. So how has the ego subsided? If there still stands somebody to receive the news that the ego is gone, then it is the ego receiving the news that the ego is gone. It is like the ego issuing itself a death certificate. So please understand, you cannot have objective experiments here, but you must have objective experiments, great experiments, very beneficial experiments in science, right? How to make it verifiable then? How to make it falsifiable? Your life is the only place where it can be seen and falsified, because the ultimate purpose is freedom from suffering. If you find yourself less afraid, if you find yourself less lonely, less insecure, then the experiment is succeeding. That's it. Also, the distinction, this thing between that when you said certain parts of the brain develop a lesion and then certain things happen. There is always someone who would say certain things have happened to those certain things have happened to me. The ego still remains. Even in the moment of death, somebody remains to say, I am dying. I am dying. That's the one, the ultimate subject of all objects, the ultimate collector of all knowledge, the receiver of all news. The one to whom everything is happening. When you say something is, please see, is not everything to somebody. When you say something is a fact, when you say something is a truth, or something is false, or something is imaginary, it is always to somebody. That somebody is what we define as the ego. To whom is this? To whom is death? The body does not cry because it is dying. Who is the one who is so afraid of death, even when death is nowhere close, nowhere around? We are young people, and yet all kinds of insecurities haunt us, taunt us. Who is the one suffering there? That one is the one we are looking to get into. But you cannot objectively get into that one, because the moment you turn the ego into an object, the ego is secured. The ego is secured. Now what the ego is reading is a book called ego. The moment you turn the ego into an object that you are scientifically experimenting with, now the ego is reading a book. This is a book titled Ego. Now this is no self-observation. You have turned yourself into a safe object that you can experiment with and still remain secured, right? So this question you must always ask, to whom is all this? Who is now saying, oh, my brain is damaged, therefore I cannot feel, or I am paralyzed, or I am experiencing this kind of cognitive disorder? Who is the one saying all that? Who is the one saying I am dumb? Who is the one saying, oh, even though I keep failing in my choices, but I am still smart? Who is the one saying that? That's the one we are interested in, for the simple reason that that's the one who suffers.
You had a question about AI as well. I was wondering when AI was going to come onto the scene.
And perhaps for us as neuroscientists, if it would convince us that actually, in fact, if we were to detect consciousness in artificial systems, that perhaps these processes don't require the brain.
I mean, I would maybe say two things about this. One is that I think the success of functionalism in explaining how various psychological processes work and how they're grounded in certain systematic functions of the brain, I would still place my bets on functionalism as being the right way of thinking about AI systems, that if they're implementing the right kinds of functions, then they can it would be odd to not ascribe them certain psychological capacities. I think we're already there with that. Now the question then comes, well, are they just performing these behaviors? Are they just acting this out? Even if the cognition and apparent thought behind it seems very rich, is it a surface level mimic of our conscious experience that goes along with that kind of psychological set of capacities? I think the reason that's a very difficult question is that we don't know enough yet about how the various functions of the brain are supporting conscious versus, say, unconscious states in the human. But I also think it just puts pressure on the very concept of consciousness that we have in both the neurosciences and a lot of philosophy of mind. That as soon as we start asking questions about, well, it's doing all the functionality, but is there someone really home? I think we've lost the focus on what we were originally trying to explain. Because that property then, which often people refer to as the hard problem or phenomenal consciousness, I don't think that exists as something that we could ever grasp scientifically. I think that is akin to arguing about whether these systems have a soul. And really what we're saying there is that it's a moral question, That we might have all the functionality in, say, a future robotic or AI system that mimics the psychological capabilities of the human mind. And if we're still arguing about whether it's conscious or not, what we're really arguing about is moral status. We're not arguing about something that we can probe scientifically.
We are probing resemblance, are we not? That's all that we are probing. If a system resembles us, we call it conscious. Now, resemblance can always be faked. And who knows whether even we are conscious in the first place, the thing that you raised, whether there is somebody home, whether there is somebody home. So, I suppose the whole thing would philosophically boil down to settling on an accepted definition of consciousness itself. Because if you label an entity conscious by seeing certain markers, certain behavioral patterns, certain symptoms, then those symptoms can always be copied by an AI system. They are already doing that. We know of the Turing's test, right? It's impossible so many times even today to tell a machine from what you call as a human being. So that way they are already conscious. Now the whole thing turns back to us. Are we conscious in the first place? How do we call ourselves conscious, right? Or is it just that there is a beautiful system that you are studying as a scientist, and that system is self-sufficient? However, there comes in or gate crashes an intruder, a party pooper, and says the system is mine. Whereas that one is not really needed. What you have is actually only the brain. Only the brain really exists, right? But then somebody comes in and says the brain is mine. The brain is mine. Yes, the brain is, but there is really nobody to own the brain. Therefore, there is really nobody to be conscious. To be conscious. And once you say that, the entire social order and the basis of relationships and entire economics, everything stands to collapse. So it's a difficult question, as Professor said, but it's also a very dangerous question.
Okay, we have so many questions. How about right here? Yeah. Okay.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for a great talk. I think a thought that comes to me, the word phenomenology, I think, is the big word, because when I examine sort of my own experience, at the first level, I can feel that it feels that there's this locus of control, and that locus of control seems to regress upon any sort of examination. But then when you're in a state, so for example, a depersonalized state, even though you don't feel that you're the locus of the action, you can't deny that there is an experience of not being a locus of the action. And so it seems that within experience, there's this kind of undeniable fact that there is this qualia, whereas when we talk about ego, it seems to me that what you're getting at is that it's almost the inferences we're making about our sampling of the world, about our the narrative, but that too seems to be this appearance in consciousness. But then when I come to look for this locus of volition, or even beyond volition, looking for this locus of experience, it just seems to be this very flat sort of plane. And I'm not sure that we can ever not circumvent it. And I just wondered, what you've thought about that, and if I was understanding correctly.
One cannot think about it, and this is subjective, right? I can prove it only through your life. I cannot prove any of this objectively, right? So I concede that even as I begin, and I concede that readily every time. This can be proven only if you see it in your own life. We're talking of the ego, who claims to be the center of all life. So where else would you look at it, observe it, and whatever? You don't think of it. It's a stream. The I amness is constantly changing, is it not? Are you the same person you are on this chair that you were outside this room? Equally, at the other end of the dualistic consciousness, do you have the same object that you had 2 hours back? It's a stream, and the stream is flowing at both ends. The subject is changing, the object is changing, the object is influencing the subject is projecting meanings on the object and building stories. So you cannot think about it and come to a philosophical conclusion. There is liberation in just continuously watching it. If you do not watch it, you become it. And becoming that means accepting bondage, accepting slavery, which is suffering. Watch it. And I love to say, when you watch, the seer does not survive the seeing. If you have the intention to see, the seeing will dissolve you. If you can look at yourself truly with the help of all whatever is possible, with the help of scientific knowledge, with the help of the external mirror, everything, and with the help of your honesty, if you can look at yourself sincerely, the seeing will dissolve you, and it has to be a continuous process. That's it. That's it.
No, thank you.
Thank you. I was really interested in Steve's question about not just like whether we can improve metacognition, but whether we should. And I do agree with Acharya's response that kind of there is some types of pain that are functional, that teach us something, and some that are not. But I also think that this response kind of just pushes the question back a bit further, because now we have to grapple with who gets to decide which pain is functional and which is not. And when do we get to decide this? And how do we do it in the first place?
The best decision is when there is nobody to make that decision. So do not ask who should be deciding. Ask whether there is any need for the decider. Why must the ego be an adjudicator, a decider, the judge, when it comes to matters that are purely physical? And the body is such a beautiful apparatus. You have the wonderful brain, which is capable of dealing with all matters material. And that includes matters of the body, that includes matters of the universe, that everything. Your brain is so wonderful. Why must the ego decide for the brain? Let the brain make decisions. The ego has to make one decision, only one decision, to retreat, to withdraw, to be no more, so that decisions can happen in absence of the ego. And any decision that happens in absence of the ego is a beautiful decision by definition. So you don't ask what kind of state of the ego is going to be the best decider, the best judge. No. No state of the ego is a great state. Only the reduced state is a relatively good state. Watch the ego so that you are no more there in your own life. And then let decisions flow. The brain is capable of making decisions. Life itself makes decisions. You don't have to decide.
I think this is a very interesting question about to what extent should we as a society be trying to put in place structures that change people's pain and suffering because we have decided. I think there is a very clear-cut decision that has been made. We have decided as a society, and your example of anesthesia is a lovely one, that is not acceptable. The doctors and the voters and our health services around the world have largely decided we would prefer if anaesthetists had a job and could do anesthesiology. But there are grayer cases, I think, and we can take examples from medicine of grayer cases, particularly there's a live debate in the UK at the moment about how much we should be giving children medication for conditions such as ADHD. And certain children clearly benefit from those medications. But then there is a debate about are people being, say, over-medicated. And I think I don't want to answer for you. I'd be very interested to hear your response to this, because I think that would be maybe a case where the question is pointing out that there are some aspects that society has said that's clear cut, but there are others where maybe it's not quite clear whether we should be encouraging people to not have that suffering, because that seems to be quite an it's quite a strong position to take when you consider some of these grey area medical cases.
So let's assume that this room is full of qualified doctors, PhDs, professionals, intellectuals who know all about this field. And they have been entrusted with the responsibility. Please decide this thing which is very critical for the kids of this nation, because there is no marginal matter. Somebody might be harmed, but we also see that a few kids are benefiting from this. It's a very serious matter. We must sincerely go into this. And all of these here are capable and knowledgeable professionals. And I am to say something to them. What I'll say is, please see where your decision is coming from. You have all the knowledge, you have all the expertise. I'm nobody in front of you when it comes to domain knowledge that you hold, right? All I would ask is your decision coming from facts of the situation or from glory of the past? Is your decision coming from facts of the situation or attachment to kids, particularly of your species? Is your decision coming from the facts of the situation, or is it coming from how other influential countries have decided? That's all that I would invite you to look into. Beyond that, you are the best judge. I am nobody to advise you. So you see, the brain, I would repeat, the territory you daily walk into, I marvel at it. Such a beautiful one, right? But I don't marvel at the ego. Yes. So that's the thing I want to sincerely, honestly, continuously target in terms of look at it, so that it doesn't get to do what it does in the dark. So yes, all doctors are wonderful. What spoils their practice or their opinion is the ego, right? I'm not talking of an unqualified quack here, right? If there is one such person, we'll say, no, your problem might not be the ego. Your problem is that you're not educated enough. Let's enroll you somewhere else, and let's first of all, please get you out of this room. But the room is already full of qualified people. Still, they may get the decision horribly wrong. Now, what is it that causes that horribly wrong decision even from otherwise great people? That is the danger that I would want to address. That is the danger I would want to get out of the way of welfare of British kids. That danger is the ego. Otherwise, the decision can be made. You have all the scientific apparatus. You can do studies. You can do scientific studies. You can have psychological surveys. You can talk to parents. You can talk to. There is just so much we can do. Obviously, there is no limit. I too have a science and technology background, so I know how well equipped we are. But still, we turn out so destructive. Still, we use all the science and technology and knowledge for such nefarious uses. Who does that? That's the one I intend to, spar with. That's all.
So many questions, but we are starting to come to the end of our time here. So we can take just a couple more maybe, and then we'll close up, because I know people do have places to go. So yes, back here, please.
Hi, thank you both for interesting talk. I wanted to ask just both of you more on this notion of Donetian illusionism and so on. I think something I find myself wondering is what's the like cash value, so to speak, of illusionism as a whole, because it seems to rely on this unearned sort of epistemic leap of faith on our exteroceptive access, which is to say that everything I sort of interact with in the world as an individual is laundered through experience, right? And if I look at we can sort of very sort of clearly see that our interoceptive states, as has been discussed today, are inaccurate, right? But then to go on to say that the sort of qualitative nature of what I see is illusory. It isn't actually, it merely seems to be as a kind of representational self-model or some other model. I think it's worth keeping in mind that the evidence I use to source this is also appearing in my experience. It's also participating in the sort of field of subjectivity. And I find myself wondering how we can sort of license, empirically or otherwise, this idea that our external perceptions somehow are, immune to, because if illusionism is true, then that means that all of my perceptions, exteroceptive and interoceptive, are compromised, like empirically. So I find myself kind of wondering how we can justify illusionism on those grounds.
So I think that I think it's a very interesting question, but I don't agree that illusionism necessitates then thinking that our experience is an illusion. I think this is a common misreading of illusionism as a technical term in consciousness science. I don't think it's probably not a great term, really. I think if the illusionists had their time again when they were coming up with this concept, they would have labeled it somewhat differently. All it's saying, and it's actually connects back to the previous question as well. All it's saying is that we cannot gain access to the scientific basis of consciousness via first-person experience. That's all it's saying. So it's saying that our perception of the world is real, to the extent to which it's adaptive, as the previous questioner was pointing out. The illusion is not about the outside world. The illusion is about the notion that the scientific basis of our experience is revealed to us through first-person experience. Now, if you take that as a starting point, that's what leads to the hard problem, the notion of irreducible subjectivity, the notion that you need a radical metaphysics to solve consciousness. All of those things flow from assuming that it is revealed to us via first-person experience. Illusionists are just saying, hang on, let's maybe treat it as, let's maybe be a skeptic, as we were talking about before, about the basis of our experience. That's all it's saying.
I think that's very reasonable, but the biological evidence that I use to buttress the possibility that my first-person evidence is not, giving me direct access is itself access through my first-person experience. I'm never circumventing the condition of my own subjectivity. So,
but that I think is why. So in a way, that's the problem that the anti-illusionist suffers from. The phenomenal realist suffers, I think, from the problem you're describing.
So I think it's perfectly reasonable.
Maybe we shouldn't have too much back and forth, otherwise we could go on forever.
You wanted to ask both of them.
I think it's well settled
or not.
when it comes to there are hardly any things that we experience. When it comes to illusionism, what if the one who is experiencing is itself just a story? You see, you said something about illusionism, and then Professor said that is not what illusionism exactly is. But you believed that you know what illusionism is. Now we are all intellectuals, and it should not be too difficult to accurately see what a scientific paper says or how a philosophical theory reads. But still there is someone here who is generating a story out of whatever he is hearing in this conversation or whatever he is reading. That one is the illusion. that experiencer, that receiver inside. The world outside is hardly an illusion. In fact, this kind of a thing you find in non-dualistic philosophy also, where Acharya Shankar would say, Jagat Mithya. So they would say, okay, the entire world is an illusion because we cannot have epistemic certainty. It's all coming to you via the senses and the mind is conditioned and the rest of it. But when you go close to it, what you find is that yes, it probably is all of an illusion, because what you call as the body, that lends geometry to the universe, and what you call as the ego, that lends story and meaning to the universe. This is a three-dimensional body, that's a three-dimensional universe. And because I exist here, so the entire universe exists for me. I'm the owner, I'm the consumer, I'm the storyteller. I will posit a God. I'll say God made the world and God made the human being, man, as his supreme creation and all those things. So that's where the illusion lies. The illusion lies in the ego. The illusion lies not outside in what you see, but the one who sits inside and collects reports of what has been seen by the eyes and distorts the entire report to suit its own objective of self-preservation. So yes, illusionism, yes, obviously. Who would say that he has not stumbled in life? Who would say that he has not been shocked in life? Who would say that he has not been duped or cheated? But and the worst kinds of shockers often come from those you were very certain of, the ones you trusted. Now, was that not an illusion? Please ask yourself what you call as your relationships, what you think of as yourself, what you think of as your knowledge. How reliable is all of that? And science is honest. Science would always say, okay, this stands only as long as it is not negated. But then in our life, we would say, oh, I'm 100% certain of this, 100% certain of that, and only to end up in psychological harm. Now, all this is illusion, because the one entering the relationship is hardly even the system. The one entering the relationship is the inner ego. And since the inner ego is an illusion, therefore everything around you ends up being simply an illusion. And that results in harm and suffering. That's all that I have to say.
So I've been told we will take one final question in the back here, and then we really should wrap up.
Thank you. This has been very, very fascinating discussion. So thank you, Professor Fleming, and thank you, Acharya ji. Just a last question or quick question from my side, Acharya ji, is when I was reading your volume 1 on Bhagavad Gita, when you write about chapter 2, there's somewhere you actually write, which I think stuck with me, is that everybody thinks. So right from an ant to a tiger to a human being, but they all are bounded by their limitation of how much they are able to think. So there's a paragraph where you talk about saying all our scientific development is come out of the evolved thinking of the human being, because the human being has been able to expand that boundary. If that's the case, and thinking is limited by whatever, even if it's expanded, but it is still limited, how should I was actually going to come to the topic about how should I think about thinking? And then the question is really around, can thinking take us to realizing, I'll refer to Professor's book's title, Know Thyself, and if not, then who can?
You see, thinking is an innate property of the system. That's why I said that even the smallest creatures, they think. Professor Chitka, I was speaking to the other day, he was talking of beautiful work that he has done on bees. Similarly, Dr. Birch, work that he has done on octopuses. And they all have that physical self. Bees know, for example, how to make their way out of a little cleavage in the wall somewhere. So they would fly sideways, for example. That can happen only if they know that this is my body and this is the geometry of my body. Right? They have to know that. Only then they can, adjust themselves to fly out of the little cavity available. So So that is there. Thinking is happening. You're designed to think. When it comes to the ants, thinking is happening even without words. You need not have the supportive structure of language to think, right? Bees don't have the kind of languages we have, but they still think. And they not only think, they also cooperate with each other, and all that is happening without the kind of language that we have. When you talk of this actually what it means to convey is seeing how thinking happens. This is the second thinking refers to something in the system. The first one refers to insight. And what is insight? Insight is not an action of the system. Insight is the removal of the intruder in the system. The system can look at itself, but the intruder distorts the vision. See, look at your life. You are the one best placed to acknowledge what is happening there, but still you don't acknowledge. It should be very easy to see what is happening in your life, but we all live in self-glory and self-concepts, sometimes self-pity. Why? Because seeing what is happening, including thinking, is not really difficult. It is happening here. Who else would acknowledge? Who else would know? You would know. You would know. But there is somebody who blocks it, distorts it. So the first one really refers to insight. Insight. That insight can ride upon thought, which is fine. But that insight can even be thought-free. Most importantly, that insight must be ego-free. Only then you will really see what is going on, right? So it's not as if you are saying, okay, how can I use the function of a system to look at system itself? That is anyway happening. That's the entire work that professor has done, and we all are recipients of that work. We know the system looks at itself. You must see what blocks the system for acknowledging what it already knows about itself. Don't you already know about yourself that you have a tendency to wake up late? And yet you trust yourself to catch the morning flight and you miss it. That's what you must examine. In spite of knowing myself, why do I act in self-harming ways? That's insight. And that comes when the ego steps back, gets out of the way.
Well, I think that is a beautiful place for us to end this lovely conversation, right coming back to where we started with. So thank you both so much for this truly engaging time. Please help me, yes? And thank you all for your lovely questions and your commentary, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Lovely, sir.
That was really excellent. Really, really great. No, it was a wonderful discussion. Really great.
I didn't get to know when we passed these 2 hours. Very busy, very smooth.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, very nice to meet you.
Thank you. Same here. Thank you, sir, so much. What's the date today? It's 9th. 9th. It's good that I know that I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your time in the UK.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
I'm flying back tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
But I'll be back in September, October. Hope to see you.
Yes, safe travels. Lovely to meet you.
Just download the Acharya Prashant app, and there you go to the community section, and you have live testimonials streaming in at the rate of 1 every 5 minutes. I'm seeing lives change in thousands, if not millions, every day in front of my own eyes. We are doing it. We have actually done it.
Join the community of more than 2 lakh participants on the Acharya Prashant app. Your first month is completely free. You'll get full access to Gita Mission. On the app, you will get regular live sessions, daily exclusive conversations with Acharya Prashant, access to the vibrant Gita community, wisdom exams, curated news, audiobooks, quotes, and much more. Search Acharya Prashant on Google Play Store or Apple App Store and download now.